The life of Jeremiah Liver-Eating Johnson is a tale interwoven with the rugged and unforgiving landscapes of the American West.
The name Jeremiah Johnson brings to mind a rugged, lone figure surviving in the wild mountains, an untamed symbol of the American frontier. But behind the myth lies a real man, John Liver-Eating Johnson, whose life story blurred the lines between reality and legend. Was he a vengeful warrior hunting down his enemies? Or has his story been distorted over the years into something far more sensational? To uncover the truth, we'll journey through the brutal landscapes he called home, the fierce battles he fought, and the myths that followed in his wake. From his harsh life as a trapper to the unforgettable legends that grew around him, we'll separate fact from fiction and explore why his story still captivates us today. Join us as we dig into the real tale of Jeremiah Johnson and uncover the man behind the myth. The myth of Jeremiah Johnson. Jeremiah Johnson is a name that resonates with the spirit of adventure and the untamed wilderness of 19th century America. Historians can't quite agree on who Johnson really was. Some described him as a brave-natured frontiersman with a strong, good sense of humor, while others portray him as a vengeful, dangerous figure, even rumored to be a cannibal who violently targeted the Crow tribe, killing them and leaving poisonous provision behind. This mix of hero and terror in Johnston's story has turned him into a lasting legend, capturing his imagination and making him one of the most unforgettable characters in American frontier history. Jeremiah Johnson was a story inspired by the extraordinary life of the mountain man John Liver-Eating Johnston, whose last name was Johnston and later went by Johnson. He was a figure who has sparked both admiration and fear, although as his story spread, it grew wilder and more exaggerated. Writers for newspapers, magazines, and cheap popular novels began adding dramatic details to capture the interest of readers back east who were fascinated by the wild frontier. Johnston wasn't the only one whose story was stretched this way. Famous mountain men like Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, John Coulter, Hugh Glass, and Jedediah Smith were also turned into larger-than-life characters through these exaggerated tales. It wasn't just gunfighters who became legends. Mountain men were also transformed into mythical figures, adding to the romanticized image of the American West. Sometimes these legendary figures played into their larger-than-life reputations and even found ways to profit from them. The mountain man culture encouraged these tall tales. Around the campfire, these men would boast and stretch the truth, much like people today might exaggerate stories on social media. By the 1950s, fascination with the Wild West was at an all-time high. The stories once told in dime novels were now adapted for TV and movies, adding even more drama and distortion to the truth. An example of this is the story of John Jeremiah Johnson, recounted in Raymond Thorpe and Robert Bunker's book, Crow Killer. This wave of Western media helped turn frontier men into almost mythical characters, forever shaping how we see the American West. The 1972 Western film Jeremiah Johnson stars Robert Redford as Johnson, a worn-out veteran of the Mexican-American War, who hopes to find peace in the quiet life of a mountain man in the Rocky Mountains. But his new life takes a tragic turn when a conflict with a native tribe leads to the brutal killing of his wife and adopted son. Johnson's quest for revenge against the tribal warriors who took his family becomes the core of his legend. By leaving one warrior alive to spread the story, Johnson ensures that his tale of vengeance lives on. Jeremiah Johnson was the second film collaboration between Robert Redford and director Sidney Pollack, following the 1966 drama This Property is Condemned. Before Jeremiah Johnson, Pollack had been recognized with an Academy Award nomination for Best Director for the 1969 psychological drama They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, which established him as a notable talent. Redford, meanwhile, had risen to major stardom that same year with his role in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a Western buddy film that showcased his charm and on-screen presence. Together, Redford and Pollack brought a unique, thoughtful approach to Jeremiah Johnson, blending Redford's iconic, quiet intensity with Pollack's attention to character-driven storytelling. This collaboration helped create a more nuanced Western, focusing not only on action, but also on the complexities of solitude and survival in the wilderness. Jeremiah Johnson is a remarkable film, regardless of the historical accuracy of the legend itself. Robert Redford delivers a strong, thoughtful performance as a rugged mountain man, with his thick beard and quiet presence adding to the character's believability. Shot in the stunning landscapes of Utah, the film captures the beauty and danger of wilderness life. The scenery isn't just a backdrop. It helps tell Johnston's story by showing the challenges he faces in the harsh, unpredictable world of the frontier. Like the best nature-driven movies, Jeremiah Johnston pulls viewers into his tough, solitary life, allowing them to feel the intense rhythms of survival in the wild. This combination of powerful acting and incredible landscapes makes it a visually captivating and unique Western. Crow Killer, the saga of liver-eating Johnston, produced by Raymond Thorpe and Robert Bunker, who never met, explores the life and legend of John "Liver-Eating" Johnston, an American frontiersman whose tales of vengeance, survival, and violence in the mid-1800s captivated audiences. Much of the book's content is based on oral history from two key sources, Del Gué and White-Eye Anderson, allegedly one of Johnston's acquaintances. This reliance on oral storytelling and myth-making added elements of embellishment, fueling Johnston's reputation as a larger-than-life character. According to the book, Johnston was set on a vengeful warpath after his Native American wife, Swan, was killed by Crow warriors, initiating a vendetta against the Crow that led him to kill and allegedly consume their livers as a symbolic act of defiance. This part of his legend, though largely unverifiable, became the basis of his liver-eating nickname, and Thorpe and Bunker's portrayal emphasizes Johnston's immense strength, his survival in hostile conditions, and his skill as a warrior. The image of Johnston as a nearly mythical, super-primitive mountain man was part of what allowed the story to thrive in the popular imagination, especially when the American frontier was romanticized as a land of untamed heroism and violent justice. The movie amplifies Johnston's character as an ultimate symbol of independence and survival, alone in the wilderness and relying only on his instincts and skills. Fisher's Mountain Man explores similar themes of solitude and self-sufficiency, portraying the frontier as a place where men must confront themselves. The film echoes this theme by following Johnston as he learns from other mountain men like Bear Claw and struggles with the emotional toll of a life of solitude. In Jeremiah Johnston, Bear Claw Chris Lapp is a key character who teaches Johnston the skills needed to survive in the wilderness. He shares his wisdom and stories, which reflect the idea of mountain men as experienced and knowledgeable survivalists. This character is likely inspired by real figures like Jim Bridger, but the film enhances Johnston's journey by showing him learning from these legendary individuals. This mentorship adds depth to Johnston's character, transforming him from a beginner into a seasoned, legendary figure himself. The film amplifies the myth of Johnston by portraying him as a stoic, silent hero, largely through Robert Redford's restrained performance. Johnston's few words and steady gaze create a mythical figure embodying frontier values, resilience, stoicism, and strength. This cinematic choice reflects how stories about Western legends often simplify and exaggerate personalities, creating strong and silent archetypes that reflect ideals more than reality. In both the film and Crow Killer, Johnston is shown in continuous, often violent interactions with Native American tribes. While there are documented conflicts between settlers and native tribes, the scale of Johnston's supposed vendetta against the Crow is largely unverified and likely exaggerated in both the book and film. This narrative choice aligns Johnston with other legendary figures who battled indigenous warriors, further casting him as a frontier icon, while also adding complexity to his character by showing moments of mutual respect with the Crow, such as the film's ending, where Johnston and a Crow chief exchange a gesture of peace. The film's ending emphasizes Johnston's legendary status. After enduring years of conflict, he finally meets the Crow chief, and their shared gesture of respect implies that Johnston has moved beyond mere survival to become a respected figure, both feared and admired by enemies and allies alike. This open-ended conclusion mirrors how legends often leave room for personal interpretation, cementing Johnston as an American folk hero. While his life might have some basis in reality, over time, it has grown into a myth. Crow Killer has contributed greatly to cementing Johnston's story in American folklore. By blending elements of truth with highly dramatized feats, the book captures the allure of the Wild West while presenting Johnston as a figure of both admiration and fear. While the real Johnston was likely not as extreme as depicted, the author's portrayal helps illustrate how American culture often idolizes rugged individualism and raw survivalist prowess, qualities that Johnston symbolized for generations. While it is said that Sidney Pollack's film emanates from Thorpe and Bunker's Crow Killer, the film actually draws heavily from Vardis Fisher's Mountain Man. Vardis Fisher's Mountain Man, which was produced in 1965, is a novel that looks at the tough realities of living in the American wilderness with a focus on personal struggles. The story follows Sam Menard, a mountain man who faces survival challenges in the Rocky Mountains, much like many people did during the frontier days. Unlike other stories, such as Crow Killer or Jeremiah Johnston, Fisher's book is more focused on the inner emotional and philosophical struggles of its character, rather than emphasizing the heroic or exaggerated elements of the mountain man myth. Fisher's approach is more reflective, highlighting the personal toll that life in the wilderness took on people, rather than turning it into a tale of adventure or glory. For example, in the story, a woman, Narcissa, meets Menard while on his journey. Narcissa symbolizes the human connection that Menard yearns for in an otherwise brutal and solitary existence. Their relationship explores the themes of human companionship in an unforgiving world, contrasting with the violence and isolation Menard usually experiences. Another figure in the story who represented the other side of frontier life was Billy Joe. He represented the violence and brutality that often accompanied survival. He was an unrelenting character whose actions brought violence and chaos into Menard's life. His presence in the story emphasizes the constant nature between human nature and the salvage world of the frontier. The film combines the deep self-reflection of Fisher's character Menard with the legendary action-packed adventures of Crow Killer. This mix creates a new character who is both a tough survivor and a larger-than-life hero seeking revenge. By blending these elements, the film builds a more complex and mythic version of the frontier figure, capturing both the inner struggles and the outward heroic feats. While Crow Killer focuses on Johnston's violent revenge against the Crow tribe, Jeremiah Johnston takes a more thoughtful approach, reflecting Fisher's deeper look at life in the wilderness. In the film, Johnston is shown struggling with the loneliness and isolation of frontier life. He learns essential survival skills from more experienced figures like Bearclaw, Chris Lapp. This mentorship, which is also explored in Fisher's novel, helps to transform Johnston from a solitary, revenge-driven figure into someone who understands the wilderness and human connections. The inclusion of this relationship adds depth to his character, showing his growth and helping build his mythic status. The main difference between the film Jeremiah Johnston and Vardis Fisher's Mountain Man lies in how the two works portray their protagonists. The film presents Johnston as a symbol of rugged independence and silent strength. His quiet demeanor and survival skills turn him into a near-mythical hero, someone admired for his resilience in the wilderness. In contrast, Fisher's Sam Menard is a more introspective character. He feels the deep emotional and psychological impact of his solitude, questioning his own humanity as he struggles with isolation. While Johnston in the film becomes a folk legend through his stoicism and ability to survive, Menard's story is more about the real psychological toll of being alone, where his focus is on raw survival without resorting to violence or revenge. This shift makes Johnston in the film a more heroic, almost idealized figure, celebrated for his strength and resilience, while Fisher's novel emphasizes the internal battle that comes with being alone in the wilderness for extended periods. The film, therefore, amplifies Johnston's mythic status, while Fisher's work grounds its character in the harsh emotional realities of frontier life. Jeremiah Johnston enhances the myth of the Mountain Man by combining elements from both Crow Killer and Mountain Man. The character in the film becomes an idealized version of the frontiersman, where personal struggles are downplayed in favor of his battles with nature and other men. This shift turns Johnston into a legend admired as a symbol of American toughness, independence, and quiet strength. However, this heroic portrayal simplifies the real complexities of frontier life, which Fisher's novel explores in more depth by focusing on a mountain man's inner battles and emotional toll. Biography of Jeremiah Johnston. Jeremiah Johnston was born John Jeremiah Garrison in Little New York, New Jersey on July 1, 1824. He grew into a huge man, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall, when the average height of the day was 5 feet 6 inches tall and about 260 pounds. During the Mexican-American War, he served on a naval ship while he was underage. After an altercation in which he struck an officer, he deserted, changed his name to John Johnston, and headed west to Montana. There he tried his luck in gold mining at Alder Gulch in Montana Territory and took on work as a woodhawk, cutting and supplying cordwood to fuel steamboats. Many stories and legends surround Johnston. One of the most well-known claims is that in 1847 his wife, who belonged to the Flathead Native American tribe, was killed by a young Crow warrior and his hunting party. This tragic event supposedly drove Johnston to seek revenge against the Crow tribe, leading to his legendary vendetta. It was said that while he was digging for gold in Alder Gulch in Montana Territory, he met a flat-headed woman who became his wife. He built a log cabin where he settled with his wife, spending their days trapping, hunting, and occasionally selling whiskey to traders. Life seemed to offer him some peace, especially with a baby on the way, and for a while, they lived in harmony with the wilderness around them. But this calm didn't last, and soon tragedy would shatter their fragile happiness, setting Johnston on the path that would make him a legend. Around 1847, when Johnston was 23, he was away on a hunting trip when disaster struck. A group of Crow warriors attacked his home, killed his pregnant wife, Swana, and burned his cabin to the ground. As punishment for Johnston's fateful decision to guide United States Army soldiers through the sacred Crow burial ground. Consumed by grief and rage, Johnston swore vengeance and began a relentless campaign against the Crow tribe. His single-minded pursuit of revenge would become a key part of his legend, marking him as a fearsome and determined figure on the frontier. Historian Andrew Mahane Sutherland reports that Johnston allegedly killed and scalped over 300 Crow warriors in his quest for revenge, consuming their livers in a ritual meant to dishonor his enemies and heighten his reputation over a period of 25 years. As the story goes, Johnston's growing collection of scalps and his brutal reputation made him a figure of terror across the frontier. Tales of his actions spread, painting him as an unstoppable, fearsome avenger, a legend who, over time, became both feared and respected across the West. Historical accounts suggest that Johnston ate the livers of his Crow victims to prevent them from entering the afterlife, as the liver was believed to be essential for passage to the spirit world in Crow tradition. This gruesome act earned him the notorious nickname Liver-Eating Johnston, which became a symbol of his ruthless pursuit of vengeance. The legend of his violent retribution, combined with the unsettling ritual of consuming his enemies' livers, cemented his reputation as one of the most feared figures on the frontier. One popular story attributed to Jeremiah Johnston, though some sources credit it to Boone Helm, recounts a daring winter journey of over 500 miles, about 800 kilometers, to deliver whiskey to his Flathead kin. During this trip, Johnston was ambushed by a group of Blackfoot warriors. According to one version of the story, the Blackfoot warriors planned to sell Jeremiah Johnston to the Crow, his mortal enemies. Stripped to the waist and bound with leather thongs, he was placed in a teepee with a single guard. Using his strength and cunning, Johnston managed to break free from the straps. He then knocked out the guard with a powerful kick, seized the guard's knife, and scalped him. Afterward, Johnston fled into the wilderness, managing to cover 200 miles, about 320 kilometers, to reach the cabin of his trapping partner, Del Guay. While the details of the tale vary, it's often used to highlight Johnston's survival skills and his ability to outwit or overpower enemies despite overwhelming odds. Eventually, Jeremiah Johnston made peace with the Crow tribe, who came to see him as a brother, bringing an end to his personal vendetta that had lasted for 25 years and left many Crow warriors dead. However, despite this reconciliation, the violence of the American West was far from over. The region was still a battleground, especially during the Plains Indian Wars of the mid-19th century. Other tribes, such as the Sioux and Blackfoot, would soon feel the wrath of Dapyek Absaroka, the Crow name for the Crow killer, as well as Johnston's fellow mountain men, who lived by a harsh code of survival and vengeance in the wilderness. While Johnston's story ultimately shifted from one of relentless revenge to one of peace with the Crow, the broader context of frontier life remained violent and turbulent. The mountain men, often seen as both heroes and outlaws, played crucial roles in shaping the West, caught in a never-ending conflict between survival and the growing forces of colonization. Their tales, like that of Jeremiah Johnston, became legends, though the true extent of their actions and the complex relationships they formed with native tribes remain subject to interpretation. It is reported that in 1864, Jeremiah Johnston enlisted as a private in Company H of the 2nd Colorado Cavalry, joining the Union Army in St. Louis. He served for a year before being honorably discharged in 1865. Later in the 1880s, Johnston became involved in law enforcement, first as a deputy sheriff in Colson, Montana, and then as town marshal in Red Lodge, Montana. This shift from a life of violence and survival in the wilderness to serving in official positions reflects the evolution of his character from a feared figure to one who participated in the more structured aspects of frontier life. In his time, he was a sailor, scout, soldier, gold seeker, hunter, trapper, woodhawk, whiskey peddler, guide, deputy constable, and log cabin builder, taking advantage of any source of income-producing labor he could find. He even started a small Wild West show and traveled with Calamity Jane for a while, telling tales of the frontier and his Indian killing exploits. By the time Johnston had moved into roles like deputy sheriff and town marshal in the 1880s, the West was undergoing dramatic changes. The buffalo, once a central part of the landscape and Native American life, had been wiped out. The beaver, which mountain men like Johnston had trapped for fur, was nearly gone as well. The large game that had once roamed freely was dwindling. Native tribes, who had once thrived across the land, were now being decimated by violence and disease, their territories stolen, and their people forcibly relocated to reservations. In many ways, Johnston had become a symbol of a dying era, just like the Native Americans and the wilderness he had once known. As the frontier gave way to more settled lands and growing towns, Johnston, once a living embodiment of the rugged, untamed West, had become a relic of the past, living in a world that no longer resembled the one he had helped shape. His story, full of survival, vengeance, and independence, mirrored the decline of an entire way of life. In January 1878, the Washington Post published an obituary for Jeremiah Johnston, prematurely reporting his death. Despite the fact that Johnston lived for another 20 years, the newspaper's obituary depicted him as a brutal and violent frontiersman, portraying him as someone who killed Native Americans for sport or in revenge for the alleged murder of his wife. The obituary also highlighted his notorious nickname, Liver-Eating Johnston, and sensationalized his actions as cannibalistic, describing them as revolting and emphasizing the gruesome nature of his reputed revenge. Over time, so many exaggerated and violent stories had been told about Jeremiah Johnston that it became nearly impossible to separate fact from fiction. As Johnston's legend grew, his real-life actions were overshadowed by these bloody myths, turning him into a figure of fear and fascination. In a twist, Johnston himself started to change his own story, revising the details of how he earned his infamous liver-eating nickname during interviews with newspapers. Johnston's final residence was in the Los Angeles Old Soldiers' Home in Santa Monica, California, where he died penniless on January 21, 1900. He died at the age of 76 and was buried in the military cemetery there. Johnston's grave remained in a quiet location for decades, surrounded by the changing landscapes of Los Angeles. Over time, as the city grew with the construction of roads, highways, and urban development, the area around his final resting place transformed into a bustling urban environment. By 1972, when the film Jeremiah Johnston was released, the mountain man's grave was located almost directly next to the San Diego freeway, highlighting how the once pristine, wild frontier had given way to modernity. It was about that time in the 1970s, when a middle school teacher named Try Robinson in Antelope Valley, California, was teaching his students about the legendary figure of Jeremiah Johnston. During this time, Robinson discovered that Johnston had expressed a wish to be buried in the Northern Rockies, where he had lived and worked. After learning this, A friend from Old Trail Town in Cody, Wyoming, offered to re-enter Johnston's remains there, offering to pay for the relocation. Try Robinson's middle school students became deeply involved in advocating for Jeremiah Johnston's reburial in his old stomping grounds in the Northern Rockies. They took action by writing to the Veterans Administration and even to Robert Redford, the actor who portrayed Johnston in the 1972 film Jeremiah Johnson. Their efforts grew into a larger movement, with many people supporting the idea that America's most famous mountain man should be laid to rest in the wilderness he had called home. In 1974, this movement culminated in a ceremony where more than 2,000 people gathered in Cody, Wyoming, to pay their respects at Johnston's new burial site. Notably, Robert Redford himself served as a pallbearer, along with 5 other men who dressed as frontiersmen in rawhide, adding to the symbolism and connection to Johnston's legendary life. This event shows the enduring legacy of Johnston's mythic status and how it was celebrated even decades after his death, with Redford's involvement underscoring the influence of the film and its connection to Johnston's modern-day legend. Some residents of Red Lodge, Montana, argued that Jeremiah Johnston should be buried in their town rather than in Cody, Wyoming. They believed that Johnston didn't even like Buffalo Bill Cody, the famous showman for whom Cody, Wyoming was named. According to certain historians, Johnston and Buffalo Bill had once gotten into a fistfight, further fueling the debate over where Johnston should be laid to rest. This disagreement highlights the ongoing rivalry and differing interpretations of Johnston's life, with some communities feeling strongly connected to his legacy and seeking to honor him in the place they believed was most appropriate. Regardless of the debate over where Jeremiah Johnston should be buried, he would likely have approved of being laid to rest in the wilderness, close to the majestic mountains, near the gateway to Yellowstone National Park. The rugged landscape that Johnston called home seems like the perfect place for his final resting place. Given his life as a frontiersman and the legends surrounding him, he would probably have appreciated the movie made about him, especially the iconic line, "The Rockies is the marrow of the world." This quote captures the essence of the untamed and breathtaking landscape he so loved, a sentiment that Johnston himself might have shared, reflecting his deep connection to the wilderness. Jeremiah Johnston's story is a blend of myth and reality that has evolved into a symbol of the American frontier. Known for tales of liver-eating revenge and depicted as a quiet hero in the Jeremiah Johnston film, he embodies the rugged wilderness and resilience. Yet beneath the myth, Johnston was a complex figure, part truth, part legend. His legacy continues to captivate, representing themes of survival, revenge, and the quest for peace in a chaotic world. Whether real or fictionalized, Johnston's enduring story blurs the lines between reality and myth, making him an iconic part of American culture. Jeremiah Johnston's legacy is a mix of myth and reality, shaped by both the frontier and the legends that followed him. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.